Welcome back to the Resilient Pastor Podcast. Barna really cares about pastors and church leaders, and this podcast is just one piece of a broader effort to support leaders in the daily ins and outs of ministry. Our goal in everything that we do as part of the Resilient Pastor Initiative is to encourage and equip pastors in this season. I'm joined by, of course, Glenn and Sharon. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Great.
I'm doing good.
I came across something interesting as we are in Easter season that said people on average every year spend $4 billion on clothing for Easter. And it just made me wonder, like, what's your, as pastors, you know, is this like a big thing to get a new fit, to get some new drip, as my daughter says? I think that's the word that's in now. What's the Easter swag look like for you guys?
Go ahead, Sharon. All yours.
So I realize I've never talked about this. This is probably more something for the ladies. But have I told y'all I rent my clothes?
No.
We talked about this?
No. Like you rent out your, like people can say, I want to wear what Sharon's wearing, so they rent your, like that?
Or do you buy something and then you return it the next day?
Call it rent.
Yeah.
No, I do not do that. None of the above. So
Okay,
there is a company, it's called Newly. There's a number like this, but you pay a monthly subscription and then they send you 6 items of clothing every month.
This is very vulnerable.
No, I have the same. I have the same thing, but go ahead.
So I plan out like my month ahead. If I know I'm going to be speaking, if I know I'm going to have a wedding, if I know, whatever it is, I will plan out like the items that I rent. And so I will rent, a couple things for Easter, basically, to answer your question. But the nice thing about it is I'm not buying new clothes. And so I'm not just like constantly, spending money on things that I'm only going to wear a couple times. And it's always, keeps my wardrobe up to date. And so, yeah, I actually really love it. I enjoy it.
We have opened up a portal in the universe here. I had no idea these things exist. I was just going to give a simple answer that I might buy a new shirt for Easter. Maybe, nothing extravagant.
Yeah. You step up your game, Glenn.
Well, listen, going to Southern California from Colorado, things changed, didn't they, for you?
They've changed so much. I have these wonderful academic wool blazers, tweed blazers that are collecting dust in my closet, to my wife's great delight. I basically wear a t-shirt and some kind of overshirt or jacket, shacket, the kids call it, so but that's what I do every week, basically.
Wow. Okay. Well, I kind of dress up a little bit. I used to wear bow ties and all that. And so I might have to return to the bow tie thing here, or start renting clothes like Sharon, because she's doing it on a whole nother level.
It is sustainable.
Yeah,
just think about it, guys.
I'm going to be on the offering side. I'm going to rent out my tweed blazers that I'm not using. That's what I should do.
Now you're talking.
There we go.
Well, Sharon, you're sitting down today with Robby Angle. Robby is the president and CEO of True Face, a ministry dedicated to building relational discipleship in the church. He's the creator of Discipleship Framework and serves as the discipleship advisor for Right Now Pastors Plus. He lives in Dawsonville, Georgia, with his wife, Emily, and their 8 children. Sharon, what stuck out to you from that conversation?
So first of all, Robby was just a great guy. I really enjoyed getting to know him and talk to him. And this is a guy who really loves to nerd out on talking about small groups. So we talked about the challenges of small group ministry and why it feels hard. We got into a lot, but some of it was a little bit, I would say, a little bit higher level. And so before we get into that conversation, I wanted to start out very practical and talk a little bit more about small groups with you guys. This is something that we have talked about here before, but because small groups, I feel like it's an unwieldy ministry. It's something that I think pastors are constantly trying to get their hands around. And so I wanted to hear what has been working well for you guys lately, because Rich, you mentioned before we started recording that y'all have found a method or a framework, one might say, that is working really well for you.
Yeah, and Glenn is laughing because at framework, because our producer Lauren just does not like the word framework, so I just want to throw it out there. So that's why. So just give you the listener to just help you understand context as to what's going on.
Tried to forbid us from using frameworks.
Well, I was going to say frameworks have been part of our church for a while. No, small groups. New Life started with a big small group ministry because we were initially impacted by the small group ministry out of Colombia, which was like groups of 12, which was pretty prominent in lots of Pentecostal charismatic spaces. And so it started out of like an approach of multiplying leaders and growing the church through small groups. And so New Life, throughout our 38-year history, we've had this as part of our church with some ups and downs because, like you said, Sharon, this is pretty unwieldy, but I think, so at this stage right now, about 60% of our Sunday attendance is involved in a small group. And that goes a little higher during the course of Lent and Advent, where we have church-wide, shorter small group initiatives that we do for the purpose of getting people a taste of what it's like to be in community. But I would say some of the things that are working for us is, we everything we do is small groups oriented. So even if it's like a mid-sized class, we don't set up chairs and rows because we want to facilitate conversation. We want people to know one another. But the questions that we're wrestling with right now as it relates to small groups is how do we get more intentional as it relates to discipleship and mission? And so I'll just share a couple of things and then I would love to hear your thoughts on this and what you're doing. The current way that small groups are oriented, for the most part, is just facilitation, conversations that are being facilitated, which is a really great start. But what we've realized is there's lots of folks that are engaging in conversation, but what's missing is a kind of discipleship context where they're learning from someone, they're being apprenticed to someone. And so what we are trying to really experiment with in this stage is how do we add not just have conversation spaces, but really equip people who are strong mentors and disciplers and making those small group spaces more discipleship oriented. And that's something that we are currently experimenting more with. But additionally, I think, and this is pretty practical in this, we realize that small groups that are just inward facing for a number of reasons has some gaps. Number one is the quality of our bond can miss out on pretty significant things. And what I've discovered is as we do things together as friends or as a small group, as we're on mission together, as we're doing shared experiences, there's something bonding about those particular moments. And so recently we've been using kind of the phrase circles in motion because we want to see our small groups not just meet together, but be on mission as well. And so those are just a few of the things that, but everything we do is oriented around getting people a taste of what it's like to be in community and in conversation with others.
Yeah, over the years, and I remember all the different kind of small group movements and like, okay, we're a small group church. Are you a church that meets in small groups and then happens to gather on Sundays or vice versa? And there's all these different paradigms. And I would, we could probably go around the horn and tell stories of mistakes we've made. I think about in my younger years pastoring in my previous church in Colorado, I had this hubris where I put a map out in the lobby and I wanted people to only choose a small group based on geography and neighborhoods, and it was just very limiting. And I think, again, that had more to do with my hubris than with a actual, theological conviction. So where we're at now in Rock Harbor, this is not a framework. Okay. So Lauren, this is not a framework. This is a metaphor. And the metaphor is an ecosystem. We think of discipleship or formation at Rock Harbor as an ecosystem, and in an ecosystem, you need some key elements. Think of sunlight or oxygen or whatever. For us, the elements are learning, shared life, and practices. You got to have those elements somewhere in them, and in different ratios, different quantities. But those are the elements you got to have: learning, shared life, and practices. then there's different environments. And so, yeah, the weekend service is an environment, but so are the courses. And similar to Rich, every time we run a course, it's never rows of chairs. It's always tables with table facilitators who are trained at how to facilitate a table conversation so everybody's involved. We do a high-level version of leadership training called the cohort. Even that has breakout groups with facilitation. So everything is getting people into smaller groups. I lead men's prayer weekly on Thursday mornings. Even the men at men's prayer break out into huddles. The women do the same thing. So so those are all the different environments. And I'll add to that, one of the environments that's really key is serving. I took two of my younger kids with me to Mexico recently to participate with one of our partners down there in building a home for a family over a weekend. I don't know the first thing about building, but these people have all done it for so many years together that they all know how to do it. They're helping each other, and they have a bond through their mission, being on mission together. So those are some of the environments. And then the third piece is nutrients. And this is kind of what you're talking about, Rich, with the discipleship element. You don't just want people gathering in groups. What are we talking about? And so we what we've had in a strong way was a really great sermon follow-up study, questions, things like that. What we've added to it is we've been creating some curriculum. And this is where right now media stuff can be really helpful, because it gives you the nutrients to kind of say, we're going to work through this book of the Bible or this study, and here's all the resources already available to you. But to think in terms of elements, environments, and nutrients in a formation ecosystem has been really helpful to us.
For us, our thinking about small groups has been heavily rooted in Acts 2. And so we tell all of our small group leaders that all small groups should have 4 components. So it should be fellowship, study, prayer, and service. And so it sounds very similar to what you guys have already said. One last question I have for you guys is the question of chemistry. This is something that is really difficult to scale, because there's a number of just logistical, I think even just proximity. Like, we have people coming from all over. And so if we have someone in a small group who lives 30 minutes away, that just doesn't work very well. And so we're definitely moving in the direction, even if they're looking for kind of like a young marrieds group, it's kind of like, you really need to be closer by to them. But that other kind of intangible is chemistry. And if there isn't chemistry, groups tend to not gel. And so I was curious how you guys have thought about that. Is such a difficult thing to scale. And so is it something that you let go of? Like, what have you guys learned, or what have you figured out around that chemistry question?
Okay, Glenn.
I don't know that we've figured it out. But I think I've become less fussy about trying to orchestrate it, and in some ways accepting that our role is really to set the table. We are facilitating deep connection. We can't force it. And I used to want to like really choreograph these connections, and again, that's why the environments language has been helpful to me. And we've talked about David Kim's book before, Made to Belong. He references, we learned a lot of that language from him. But you're setting the table and creating the place where you're making it possible, making it easier, giving them sentence stems and questions to answer that make that connection possible. But after that, you kind of get out of the way and you hope that the chemistry does its work. So we have a lot of table groups at Rock Harbor that have been running for years, and they don't list. They don't list in the booklet. We do a semester system, so a person can join a group, get out of the group. Groups can start and then fold after a semester. But actually, the majority of groups at Rock Harbor are not even in the booklet, so to speak, because the chemistry's taken over and they're just running.
We haven't solved it at all. And in fact, I find myself experiencing lots of tensions with it because of our diversity at New Life. The challenge we have is, how do we allow for people to gather together because there's shared interests, affinities, personalities that are, that connect really well. And if we are a church that has all these different ethnicities represented, what does it look like in those smaller spaces to reflect some of those values? And I think there's not an easy answer for that, except I think for us to maintain that value and to say, there's a way of gathering that's based on just preference, where there is no risk that you're taking to be in close proximity to others. And so what would it look like for you to be in a space where you might not naturally gravitate to, but because this is the body of Christ, with our particular values, with our diversity, what would it look like to stretch a little bit in those spaces? And so it's not so much, here's a very clean way of doing that, but it's more so of a naming of a value to push back against the tendency that we all have to just gather around people who think like us, look like us, vote like us, and all the rest.
That's good.
That's really helpful. And I appreciate both of you sharing that it's something that maybe you feel like you've experienced some momentum around, but you've not cracked the code. And I think as long as we're dealing with human beings, we are not going to crack the code. And so for anyone who's feeling failure around this or frustration, to know that you're not alone and that we are with you. So before we jump into my conversation with Robby, we want to take a moment to thank one of our partners in the Resilient Pastor Initiative, Right Now Media. Right Now Media is the world's largest streaming library of video-based Bible study and discipleship resources made for the global church. Right Now Media is excited to announce Right Now Pastors Plus, a new upgrade option created to equip ministry leaders with on-demand training about strategic topics that matter most to the church. So visit rnow.me/plus, that is rnow.me/plus, to learn how Right Now Pastors Plus can support your ministry today. And now to my conversation with Robby Angle. Well, Robby, it is so great to meet you, and thank you for joining us on the Resilient Pastor podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's Friday afternoon when we're recording this, so I'm coasting into the weekend. It's been a good week, so yeah, I'm feeling good.
Awesome. I like those vibes. Well, for those who have never met you, I wanted to give you the opportunity to just introduce yourself a little bit. You have dedicated your ministry to relational discipleship. And so I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about what led to this particular passion, as well as how did True Face come to be?
Yeah, I've been fascinated with how people grow. High drive, high achiever, firstborn son. From a young age, I'm like, okay, God's the only thing that matters. I'm going to be dead really quick. Life is a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. So like very few men and women I see stay the course, grow, healthy. And so I've just always been fascinated by how people grow. And so went from business to aid work to professional counseling, where I really got to lean into like change theory and why we're so stuck interpersonally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. And then went into small groups at a church. And I never thought I'd work at a church because typically they're pretty rough places to work, right? Like I had enough friends working at churches that I was like, nope, never going to work at a church.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know what I'm talking about. And so then I ended up at a church and then kind of on men's groups and then eventually small groups in Alpharetta, North Point with Andy Stanley. I didn't know anything. And I jumped into the deep end to a big church. So I woke up and I was like, oh man, if God has designed us to grow through the context of relationships, and if small groups are the vehicle for people to connect relationally and grow spiritually, therefore critical to their formation, discipleship, which is the point of the church, how are we doing? Because I woke up and I was over 800 small groups, and I'm like, okay, is this actually working? Therefore, are we a healthy church? How do I know? What differentiates this? And so I was reading this teaching by True Face, these old guys in Phoenix. The Cure was the book that I read. And I said, this is the clearest teaching that lays a foundation for the principles of how we see God, how we see ourselves, to then we build community on top of that truth of beliefs and theology. So I bought enough copies of the book that the author called me and said, who are you? And I was like, I'm a huge fan of everything you guys write. And so I left North Point about 6 years ago to take over this 30-year-old nonprofit called True Face. And we develop grace-based relational discipleship resources to help stuck Christians experience deeper relationships with God and others. And over the past couple of years, we've been partnering with Right Now Media because Brian at Right Now Media said, my passion, we resource churches around discipleship. He said over the past couple of years, Robby, I want to become an ally partner to get to the root cause of why churches feel stuck in creating thriving cultures of discipleship. And so we started partnering together, and that's where we developed Discipleship Framework. So yeah.
Okay. Tell me, because I was looking at the website for TrueFace. Can you tell me a little bit about the name TrueFace? Because I thought that was the story behind that name. I thought was really beautiful. Could you share that?
Yeah, the original, they wrote True-Faced, like a play on words over
okay.
Two-Face, Two-Faced. And then they rewrote True-Faced into The Cure, which is the signature teaching. And The Cure is an allegorical book that you come to a fork in the road, and there's a sign that says this way towards pleasing God and this way towards trusting God. And the path towards pleasing God leads you to the room of good intentions. And it's a lot of great Christians who are, I'm great, you're great, we're great. And we're all wearing masks. And part of the mask is when I'm not authentic, when I'm not real with you, because my shame says, Robby, please God, do enough, know enough to grow. I need you, Sharon, and I need people listening to think I'm smart, to think I'm an awesome Christian. And so I wear this mask, and it's the mask that receives love, not me. It's a distancing between me and you and me and God. And my shame shows up in the mask of going, Robby, you're not smart enough, far enough. You're not fill in the blank enough. That's what our shame whispers to us. And that really is rooted in our motive of pleasing God, tied to our theology that God needs me to do more, be better in order for him to love me.
Yeah.
I'm great at that because I'm a high drive, high achiever firstborn son who was a missionary in Pakistan by the time I was 25. So it was like, I went for it. Yeah. I've got a lot of gold stars, Sharon. I'm an awesome Christian, right? Like, I'm like, you would look at my resume and be like, he's a great Christian, like all the gold stars. And I was so messed up internally, like the depths of my pride. I was doing all this for God out of a fear of not being enough for God. And so the interconnectivity of my theology, my identity, when we trust God, that's rooted in our theology that I'm a saint. I'm a son. There's nothing more or less I could do. And that leads me to the room of grace in the Cure. So if I trust God as a motive, rooted in my theology, in the room of grace, I can let you know the worst of me. I can let people listening know the worst of me because I can live with authenticity out of a security in my identity that he says, I am a saint, I am a son, and there's nothing more or less I could do. Oh, that's how my theology starts intersecting with my relationships, how I engage, think small groups, and how that creates an environment that's conducive for either mask wearing, room of good intentions, how we grow as disciples, or the peace and freedom that Jesus really made possible, which is the room of grace. So that's more context, but kind of.
Yeah, no, I love that. You know, I think it reminds me just a little bit. I love that is like y'all's banner name. It reminds me a little bit of AA. Like we talk a lot about how AA is such a great framework for how we should think about church, where you're not putting on pretenses. You're not showing up there because you're kicking it, you know, you're doing really well. You're showing up there because you're a mess and you need help. And I love that y'all have that. Like, that's how we need to show up to church. That's how we need to show up to small groups. That said, I want to pivot to the topic of small groups because you mentioned being at North Point and leading 800 small groups and being kind of like, is this working? Am I doing this right? And for anyone who's listening right now, I want you to hear that and just exhale, because I think every church leader has had that moment where we're looking at small groups and we're feeling like, is this working? Is this doing what it is supposed to be doing? Namely, is it discipling people? And so the fact that you were wrestling with that, we expect North Point to just be one of those churches that has all the answers already. And so that's a word of grace just for everyone listening. But Barna has a few statistics around small groups that I wanted to share with everyone who is listening. So Barna found around the topic of small groups that 85% of pastors overall agree that small groups are very important at their church. And then they also found that people join a small group for a variety of spiritual and social reasons. The top 5 reasons were that they wanted to learn more about about Christ. They wanted to learn more about scripture, wanted to develop deeper expressions of faith, wanted to get more involved with their church, and wanted to experience community. And I would say in my area, I live in the Raleigh-Durham area, that's very transient. I'm curious if we're going to see more of a shift. I do think that community piece is growing in its importance, especially as we become an increasingly disconnected culture. But all that said, as I mentioned, small group ministry is a tough gig. That is a tough ministry if that's what you are leading at your church, because it is such an unwieldy ministry. You want to have this plug and chug formula for small groups, and it just doesn't work. And so I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about what you have learned about small groups. Like let me start. This is not a question that I gave to you ahead of time. And so I'm just keeping you on your toes. Okay.
Let's go.
What are some of the mistakes, the common mistakes that you see churches making when it comes to their thinking around small groups, their philosophy of small groups, how they structure them, whatever it is?
So the mistakes that I see are not what people think they are. Most people think, like, I'm assuming under this question is it the model? Is it the approach? Is it the training? Like, what are we doing practically? That, like the 80-20 deal, what results in the 80% of the most impact, that's not it. Like, I've seen just about every strategy and model work and not work, period. Like in consulting churches all over, the model, the strategy is not what differentiates whether a church has a thriving culture of discipleship or not. And so let me, and I will get to, so another way to say that is there's two parts of this that we're going to talk about. How do you view discipleship and how do you do discipleship? The problem is not in how you do discipleship, it's how you view discipleship, because how we view discipleship informs what we do. And there's four essentials in how to view discipleship and four essentials in how to do discipleship that change any of our churches, whether we have 800 small groups or 2 small groups. I go to a church now of about 70 adults, and we're wrestling with the same tension, which all of us are asking in ministry, which is the right question. Do I have an effective plan for discipling the adults in my church? Right? Okay. That's what you just said is the tension. So I'm going to give you a couple definitions, and then I'm going to unpack the 4 and the 4, because I think that'll help.
I'm ready.
I think, what are we talking about discipleship? I like to define discipleship as the process of growing in love of God and others. Mm-hmm. So when you think of the most amazing disciple in your church, right? The healthiest, most mature spiritual formation, discipleship, spiritual growth, all synonymous words. You think of somebody that loves God and others in a noticeably different way. Jesus defined discipleship by this, though, you'll know that you're my disciples by the way you love one another. So simply, hopefully we can agree. Discipleship is the process of growing in love of God and others. So disciple making is intentionally walking with somebody to help them grow in love of God and others. The question is, how do we grow? Now let's talk about small groups. What are small groups? Small groups do not lead to growth. Relationships lead to growth. God has designed us to grow through the context of relationships. So small groups, that all of us think about some model, some connotation, some experience, and most of us have crappy small group experiences. So pause all that. Life groups, cell groups, D groups, even a lot of Sunday school. When I say small groups, that's descriptive. I'm saying an intentional and consistent environment for people to connect relationally, to grow spiritually in a size that's conducive where you can be known. So that's what I mean when I say small groups. It's a size that's conducive, 3 to 12 people, that meets with intentionality and consistency. You want to be, because we can only be loved to the degree that we're known. Mm-hmm. And you can't be known in a group of 40 very well. Right. So what size is conducive? And you have to meet with intentionality and consistency to help each other grow, to practice love and mature in how we love God and love others. So definition of discipleship, that's the outcomes we're hoping for, right? Like when we as church leaders are going, how do we have a thriving culture of discipleship? Think about that person in your head that's an amazing disciple. spiritually mature person. That's somebody that loves their wife, their kids, their husband, their friends in a noticeably different way. They're others focused out of an abundance of overflow of God's love for them. They love others. They're present. They're patient. They are love, joy, peace, patience, right? Like this is all so simple. And that comes out of an abiding life where they work it through relationships. So here's how I see formation and discipleship. A couple principles. There's a process to oversimplify it. It's like inward, me and God, you got to be still. And then you gather with people because that's how you work out and grow through the context of community, which is the body of Christ, the ecclesia, gathering where you can be known and loved. And then it's out. So in, with, out. Then it's always overflow to the world. The kingdom of God is loving others in a noticeably different way. So we start internally, we work it out in the context of community, and then the overflow of that is amazing. We love others in a noticeably different way. That's the kingdom of God. The with piece is groups, right? It's where we gather together to work out the inward stuff that we're experiencing with God, with the Spirit in us. So again, just to encourage you, I've seen every model, every strategy work and not work. But are you helping people gather together in relationships to grow and mature in love? That's why we do small groups as a descriptive word. So back to actually your question, which I hope you have 5 hours, because if we go this pace, it's going to be 5 hours, Sharon. 4 essentials to growth, to my point of what's wrong. The mental model for how people grow, we focus on outcomes, which I just described, loving others in a noticeably different way. So then we reverse engineer, how do we get really healthy, amazing disciples in our church through our groups? Well, then we go, okay, outcomes. So we go, what environments do we need? That's our model. That's our strategy. Those are both how we do discipleship. That's not the problem, because it's our philosophies that inform our environments. And our philosophies of how people grow is affected by our beliefs. Do we have a philosophy of how people grow that looks like this equation? Knowledge plus behavior equals growth, which is the majority of churches I've been to growing up.
Right.
Learn more, do better, sin less, sin management, give more, serve more, whatever. Or do we have a philosophy of growth that is trusting and receiving equals how you grow? So those are very subtle, but incredibly different, because those are rooted in our beliefs. Our beliefs inform our philosophy, which inform our environments, which lead to our outcomes. Our belief, if God is a low-grade disappointed dad, waiting for me to know more and do better, that informs, I'm going to know more and do better, God, to make right what I broke. I went to be a missionary in northern Pakistan, right? Sharon, I've got some issues. I was like, because low grade, I was told in Sunday school, if you really love Jesus, you're either Billy Graham or a missionary in Africa. And so I was like, okay, I'll go do it. Yeah. And I was so screwed up, so broken internally. And because of the depths of my pride, I was functioning under, I need to know more and do better to be more whole with God. And we pick that up in so many of our churches, directly and indirectly. Jesus said, guys, you can't do more and know enough. That's why I came. Right. The gospel of grace is like, Robby, stop. I don't need you to do anything more. Yeah. And so John 15, Jesus says the key to growth is to abide. Trust and receive is how I grow. That's inside out, not outside in. Do we see ourselves as a sinner striving to be a saint, or as a saint who occasionally sins? That philosophy changes what type of environments we have in our small groups, our strategies, our models, which result in different outcomes. So those are the 4 essentials to thinking how we view discipleship. And usually when I see church leaders change how their philosophy of growth, it changes their environments and results in different outcomes.
We'll get back to our interview in just a second, but first I want to take a moment to acknowledge one of our incredible partners in this project, Right Now Media. If you're looking for practical tools and fresh insights to help you and your team lead with confidence, check out Right Now Pastors Plus. When you upgrade your Right Now Media account with a Right Now Pastors Plus subscription, your whole team gets access to leadership training courses, hands-on resources, and consultant-level guidance from trusted ministry experts. So visit rnow.me/plus. That's rnow.me/plus to learn more about this world-class training experience. You were built for ministry, and right now, Pastors Plus was built for you. And now back to Sharon's conversation.
So how does it change, like practically speaking, because this was all kind of like high level. So how does it change environments? Like how does it change practice? What have you seen?
That's a great question, Sharon. So there's 4 essentials to how to do discipleship. We have a job to do, Robby. That's great. That's theory. There's 4 parts of 99% of any adult ministry model, which is how do we help people grow in our church? How do you develop leaders? How do you support those leaders? How do you form groups? And how do you equip groups? So most churches start with how do you equip groups? Open, like questions, sermon based, this study, that study, do we use Comer stuff? Do we do this training, this program? That's last. The key to whether a group is effective is the quality of the leader. That's like 65% of the equation. And so to tie into the 4 views on discipleship, if I have a philosophy of trusting and receiving, that I'm a saint who occasionally sins, not a sinner striving to be a saint, how am I going to train my leaders and develop leaders? I'm going to teach, I'm going to create an environment that they experience being fully known and loved. I'm going to walk with them. I'm not going to teach at them. I'm going to ask questions. I'm not going to preach. I'm not going to fix people. I'm going to walk with them the way Jesus did. Jesus modeled this way of questions, of walking with. And if our leaders have never experienced the richness of that, how can we expect them to lead differently? So I'm going to develop leaders with an experience rooted in a philosophy that's different. Then I'm going to equip those leaders with a framework of how to create a culture of those environments. And then I'm going to form groups. I'm going to cast a vision about why you get into community that's different from the church leadership down. You're not going to know more scripture.
Right.
We are inundated with knowledge in our culture. Mm-hmm. We are limited in the experience of applying knowledge into our lives. That is done in relationships. So I'm going to cast a vision in forming groups, and then I'm going to equip groups differently. So our view on discipleship, I could go, this is how it affects developing leaders, supporting leaders, forming groups, and equipping groups. For example, supporting leaders, we have to onboard leaders well, and we have ongoing care. So in ongoing leader care, if I have 8 small group leaders and I'm responsible to care for those leaders and equip them, if they're the key part of a group, how am I going to do my trainings? Am I going to help them experience and receive God's love in a way that they can then go lead their group to do that? Or am I going to go cerebral information, left brain driven stuff and miss the right brain connection experience? So philosophy informs every aspect of then the doing discipleship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would you say? I mean, I love that. I think that is very much in line with how Jesus discipled. He invested in people. Like that's essentially what he did. He invested in people. And for every leader, the question is not really how do I disciple this 200 people, 1,000, whatever it is, but more who are the people, who are the leaders that I'm surrounding myself with, that I'm investing in, that I'm discipling, because that will then trickle down, to the rest of the church. That's much more manageable. It's slower. It's not formulaic, but that's the whole point of it being relational. We're talking about relational.
But what you would do in that environment, imagine the difference of like 2 people listening to this. How they walk with people to disciple them is very different based on how they view discipleship of like no knowledge and behavior equals growth, or trusting and receiving equals growth. That's a very different dance of what we're talking about when we imagine and equip that person to do relationships with one or with a few as a mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's And again, I mean, I'm sure a lot of pastors listening to this know this, but discipling someone doesn't mean downloading all of everything you learned in seminary. It is inviting them to see how you navigate being married, how you navigate being a parent, how you navigate trials, in faith. That's what discipleship is. So with all that said, we're running out of time and we've been pretty high level. But I want to leave everyone with one very simple, very practical takeaway for thinking about small groups, leading small groups at your church, especially if small groups feels really hard right now. What is one simple, practical takeaway that you would give to pastors in their thinking about this?
Spend time thinking about it. Again, the problem is in how you view discipleship. Less important on what you do, because your viewing informs your doing, but we are so busy, we have so much to do that we focus on what we do and we think that's going to fix it. And then we try new models, we rinse and repeat, and every couple years we go, small groups don't work, so let's try a new model and plug and play a new model without spending the time and the humility and the curiosity to wrestle with how we think about it and view it. And then do what Sharon did. Go, if that's the case, Jesus modeled a principle that more time with fewer people equals greater kingdom impact. And ministry leader, you have so much pressure, for the current pulls you away from that because it's more, do more, numbers, growth. Jesus set a precedent. It's like spend more time with fewer people for greater kingdom impact. So as ministry leaders, if we want to shape a culture of discipleship in the way of Jesus, in our identity as saints, we're going to walk with, not teach, not fix, a small group of people really inefficiently for a period of time, and they will grow in their love of God and others through our love of God and others and our love of them. And then they will do the same, and they will do the same. And if you want culture change in your church around small groups, it will take at least 3 years. So just to set expectations, like this is the slow, unsexy work of relational discipleship, and people are involved and they're terrible. And so and we have equipped all of this. Like we have 30 videos, hundreds of documents. We have a consulting in a box process called Discipleship Framework. So if you go, I want to think differently and then do differently, not in a prescriptive way, but around a customizing, developing leaders, supporting leaders, forming groups, and equipping groups for my church. All of that, there are tools out there right now, Pastors Plus or discipleshipframework.com. All those are tools so you to go, oh, this is like a tailored process to clarify our customized approach that fits our culture, our people, not plug and play someone else's model. Because Robby said he's seen all the models work and not work. But think differently, do differently, and start with us, with a few people, with intentionality.
Yeah. That's such a great reminder. One thing I say from time to time is that we are farmers, not factory workers. And so we are called to this really patient work. And because it is slow and because there's so much waiting, it does feel like, is anything happening? And I do wonder if sometimes that's what happens with small groups, is we think, well, it's not working. And it's like, no, you haven't given it enough time. Discipleship takes time. So that's a really good reminder. Thank you so much for being with us, Robby. Would you mind closing us by praying for pastors who are in the trenches right now with a heart to disciple their people?
I would love to do that. God, it is we struggle to have the balance of trusting you with the outcomes. You have so many of us listening. We are have opportunities to do this, to partner with you in the kingdom work, and give us wisdom and diligence to do our best as we can, and know that you have taken care of the outcomes. Real transformation is all your work anyways. And so I pray that freedom from the expectations and the weight and the pressures that so many of us are carrying in ministry. You said you've come that we might experience peace and freedom, and I don't feel like that a lot. Lord, forgive me for not trusting you with the outcomes and carrying that weight myself. And for those of us listening, help us to be reminded that you got this, and we get to partner with you in the work you're doing. And that is slow and inefficient, and we get to do that. And so we love you. We thank you. Amen.
Robby, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everyone listening will check out TrueFace for more information.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Resilient Pastor podcast. As always, we'd love to hear how these conversations are hitting you. So shoot us a comment on social media or leave us a review with your thoughts. We are praying for you, and we will catch you next time on the Resilient Pastor podcast.